And welcome to another exciting episode of the Super Fantastic Exchange. Guys, I can't tell you how excited I am to bring to you none other, the famous Mike Brewer. You guys give it up for Mike Brewer. Can you hear him, Mike? They're clapping.
I can hear him.
Oh, man. Yeah. Thunderous applause. It's pretty amazing.
The roaring crowd. I love it.
We'll let them settle down a little bit. But hey, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to get to chat with you and steal a few minutes of your time today. But I wanted to give you a chance to have you introduce yourself a little bit more in depth before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Mike Brewer. I'm with the Radco Companies based in Atlanta. I've been here for roughly 6 years. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer. And I think as everyone's multifamily story goes, or at least the lion's share of people, I fell into the business right after college. I was a leasing consultant, and I've graduated through the ranks over the years into the current position that I hold today, and served with several different companies, Equity Residential, Mills Properties, and others. So love the industry. It's like the Hotel California. Once you're here, you can never leave.
You can check out, but you can never leave. I love
That's
it.
Right.
Hopefully you don't check out, because it really is it's what a wonderful career industry to be a part of, because there's so much depth to this career, this industry that you can pull from and grow with. So I love it, Mike, that you started as a leasing consultant and worked your way up. And in your current position as a chief operating officer, you really do have that full breadth of knowledge of from ground up. I think that's so valuable.
Yeah. I think that if I even went back a couple of years prior to that, I started out by buying single family homes, and where I was the landlord and also served as the maintenance technician. But I think the punchline to the remark that you just made that I think is very important for people in the industry is when you grow up in the industry, when you're out in the field and you're serving, whether it be a client or a team member or investor, you have such a well-rounded view of the industry that you can really give, especially the older you get, you can give advice that seems wise. Maybe that's a story I'm telling myself, but at least it's predicated on a long bit of history, and it serves to give that back to the industry in the way of, hey, I've seen that before, done that before. I love the way you're thinking, and let's try some of yours, some of mine, and hopefully we create an outcome that's really positive for all the constituents.
Absolutely. And Mike, speaking of sharing knowledge of kind of growing through this industry and growing up in this industry, I have to share your Multifamily Collective. This for me has, I've become a fan of it. And it's almost a mentor minute, and you can find Mike's YouTube videos on Multifamily Collective. So make sure you go check that out. Follow him on LinkedIn, of course, but check out Multifamily Collective on YouTube, because it's almost a daily mentorship minute with Mike. And you get a chance to kind of get some in-depth insight from Mike. It's 2 to 4 minutes, and it's absolutely worthwhile. So I do want to make sure, I wanted to point that out to everyone watching this. Go find Multifamily Collective on YouTube, follow it, watch it, just absorb it, because it's so amazing. I love it.
I received that, and thank you very much. And just a very Reader's Digest story as to the way that started. Several years ago, I could see that video would become a very important thing in terms of social media and other areas of the world. And I'm incredibly shy. I'm an introverted person, incredibly shy, socially awkward. And I just knew that I had to get good at video, because it was going to be a way of communicating to team members and otherwise. So I actually started that video podcast in order to get comfortable in front of a camera on the premise that I really look at the world as a great big education. And to the extent that you want to sharpen skills, the world's going to give you every opportunity to do so. You just have to step into that, feel that fear, and do it anyway, so to speak. So that's where that all started several years ago.
That is so cool. And I think those lessons come through awareness. If you really have to be aware of what is happening, your environment, your circumstance, the people around you. And when you have that awareness, then you really can find those lessons in the things. It's not always about the thing, but it's what you pull from the thing, or that label or that lesson that you assign to that thing that really creates the value. So Mike, I love that you shared that with us, and I'm glad you overcame your introvert tendencies to share your mentor minute, your multifamily collective. I like to call it a mentor minute because it's a mentor for me just to absorb your insight and knowledge. So
thank you.
So Mike, you inspired so many people, and me being one of those. And so one of the things I love to do on the Super Fantastic Exchange is what inspires the person that inspires so many other people. And so I reached out to you and I asked, okay, give me 2 or 3 things that inspire you. And you responded with 3 bold words. That was it. There was no statements with it. There was no sentences. Usually, when I connect with people, they give me, some sentences and everything. And I love that. And I love your bold 3 words. And especially I love the order in which you have these. And so I want to kind of jump into these. The first one that you shared is God. That inspires you. Can you share a little bit more, expand on why God inspires you?
Yeah, I know we share a similar faith, having read your books, and your books are fantastic. If you see them up there in the street,
Thank you.
Books, you should definitely read his books. And the salt analogy is certainly applicable. But I think, look, I believe it's hard for me not to believe that there was not a higher design, a higher purpose for this thing we call Earth and life, right? And so I'm very divinely inspired by the Word of God and how we make application. Every time I go out in nature, right, I'm awed and I'm inspired and I'm filled by that presence of God. And I think it's hard not to be inspired by that. Simply looking around at the world and understanding that there was divine architecture to this, and drawing inspiration from that seems simple. It's hard, but it seems simple to govern your life by something that seems higher than self, and is really the basis for giving back to the world, right? There's no better example of that. If you ever read the Bible, it's hard not to see that as a real guide for how you should live your life. It's not the only way. I don't want this to turn into a religious conversation, but I'm very inspired by the way that that person, Jesus, God, or the Holy Spirit, sort of gives you that light to look forward to govern your life by. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
No, absolutely. And I believe it gives us, it gives us a compass to guide our directions and the actions and the choices that we make. I think we all need that compass and the direction to kind of steer us in the right way, whether you call it a moral foundation or whatever you want to call it. But I think that's kind of that North Star, if you will,
that's right,
that we can travel to. And I love how you also talked about, you see the things around you. I think that just also plays into what you had mentioned earlier about, the lessons that we learn and having the awareness and the gratitude for what is around us. Because if we get so self-absorbed, so self-centered in our life, we miss all those things around us. And I think that's so valuable. And I love how that's your first point in order. And I can appreciate it because I relate to it and resonate with it as well. So that's awesome. Now, Mike, the second thing that you put on there was family. And I love this as well, as being a family man myself. So I'm curious how your family inspires you along the way.
Yeah, so I try to wrap this up in a few sentences, but I was born into a broken home, and for the lion's share of my life, I was raised in a broken home. And so there are a lot of lessons that I apply to my life today that are sort of in contrast to the way that I was raised. One example is I don't use curse words, and it's not because I don't think words or whatever, but I lived with a father who every other word out of his mouth was a curse word. So I just elected to not do that in my life as a result of that. But anyway, I took some of those lessons, moved them into my adult life, and then when I had a family, certainly we don't corner the market on being the perfect family. And I think that the lessons that I draw from my family come not only in the moments of joy, but I think probably more so through the times of adversity that we experience together as a family, and how we respond to those, how we show up as a mom and as a dad, and how we step into those moments, not knowing that there's not really a standing operating procedure for all of those things. But the lessons we take from the downside of adversity in our family are certainly things that inspire me to be a better father, to be a better business person, to be a better human when I show up in community. And so family is important to me. I feel like everything that I do is to support my family. And I certainly trip up and don't get that right all the time. But the lessons I take away from both the good and the bad are inspirations that I draw from family.
Absolutely. Welcome to the club. You know, there's no SOP associated with being a family person or a parent or anything of that nature, spouse. You know, it is kind of a work with it as you go. Now, I do love how you talked about, your father, he had his example, and you chose to create a different legacy, a different approach to the way you're doing fatherhood. And I love that you've created that new, you're starting your own path, and not letting the past anchor you to, that's the way it's always been done, so this is how I have to do it. You've made that choice to do something different. And I also believe that family is almost our training ground to, how we create relationships and lead outside of the family. So if we can get that right, or do our best, then everything else that we do outside of family is, much better for it. And so I love that you recognize, hey, we're not great, but we work together, we fight through the struggles, and, that builds skills that you then can apply outside of family. So I think that's super. All right, Mike. So last inspirational point that you shared with me, and I love how this is kind of like coming down in a kind of a upside down triangle, if you will, or however you want to look at it, starting with God, then family, and now you're talking about humanity inspires you. So I'm real curious about, and I'm intrigued why and how humanity inspires you.
Yeah, I read a lot. I don't know where, I do know where. Back in the first grade, I won a book reading contest, and it was really the consumption of the number of books that was the target for the prize. So I won that, and then I just grew a passion for reading over time. To get to the punchline, I've just read through many stories, Bible and otherwise, business, autobiographies, and things of that nature, just the sheer nature of accomplishment by human beings who, it's always in group, right? It's always in community. There certainly are people who represent companies. You think of Steve Jobs, and everything that Apple was accomplished because of Steve Jobs. Well, not really. It was inspired by humanity and making the world a better place. And in doing so, he drew together this huge community of innovators, right? And created an ecosystem for them to thrive. I think in my mind, he enriched people and then gave cause for those people to want to thrive in an environment. And it was like that in the Bible. There's certainly lots of stories in the Bible as it relates to that. But I think what I'm inspired by is when people come together with a purpose in mind, they can solve anything. You can solve anything. And I get inspired by that by way of the stories of people who have really, not just people who have moved hugely in the world, you think of the Gandhis and the Jesuses and the Steve Jobs of the world, but you can look right down to the next office, and I'm sure if you spent 5, 10, 15 minutes with somebody, you can see how they move their own little individual piece of the world. And I'm just inspired by that kind of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I love how you put it. It's not one person. It's a group of people, and you called it an ecosystem, and I think that's so valuable because ecosystem in my mind speaks to the right environment, the right nurturing, the right soil. You're feeding it properly and giving it enrichment so that it can do and maximize and reach its purpose. And I think that's so cool. And you can have that in a macro culture. You can have it in a micro culture, just like you said, the office down, 2 people with purpose and the right ecosystem can change the world.
That's right.
I love
exactly that. Right.
Oh, Mike, this is so good. You've given us so many good things, so many nuggets to really, to think about and process. And I love how you've kind of done this in my mind, it's kind of a pyramid approach from God, family to humanity as the base of it all. So Mike, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and insight with us. And before we wrap up here, I wanted to give you a chance to share a parting thought.
Yeah, so I'll share this. This is one of my favorite quotes that I hold on to or held on to for a long bit of time. I think it was Napoleon Hill that said, "What the mind of man can conceive and believe he can achieve." So I think anything that you want to achieve in your life, whether it be minute in nature or magnanimous in nature, you can do that. You can conceive that in your mind, you can believe it, you can go out and create a community around it, and you can achieve it. I grew up in a broken home. I spent time in the early innings in real estate, getting the nuts and bolts of it. I went to college, but I didn't graduate college. I don't have a college degree today. And I sit in a COO position in a multi-billion-dollar real estate firm. So it doesn't matter where you start. It just matters what you can conceive in your mind and what you can believe and what you can achieve, predicated on good character.
Boy, that's powerful. And finish it up with good character. I think that's a valuable component. Mike, thank you again for joining me on the Super Fantastic Exchange. Guys, thank you for watching. Please go follow Mike Brewer on LinkedIn. And most importantly, in my perspective, go follow Multifamily Collective on YouTube. I promise you, my money back guarantee, if you don't find some valuable insight from Mike on his Multifamily Collective, and also join there's a email newsletter you guys do as well. So weekly on Fridays, you subscribe to that as well. Valuable information. If you're just aware, you take a moment to listen in and absorb what he's sharing. It's valuable information. So thank you again, Mike. We appreciate you. And we will see you on the next episode of the Super Fantastic Exchange. Thank you, guys.